Black billionaire gave up his seat for an old lady. What she did next shocked everyone. The flight attendant froze in place, eyes wide, as the old woman's body trembled by the lavatory door. "Is she okay?" someone whispered. In seat 1A, Donovan Cole had already unbuckled his belt. He didn't know why. He was a man who calculated everything, every dollar, every investment, every minute. But when he saw that frail, elderly black woman gripping her walker like a lifeline, sweat beading along her temple as she stared down the endless row to seat 42B, something snapped. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked forward, not as the billionaire tech mogul Forbes loved to feature, but just as a man who saw someone hurting. "Excuse me," he said, tapping the stunned flight attendant on the shoulder. "Put her in my seat." The woman blinked. "Sir, you're in first class, yeah. Doesn't matter today." Passengers gasped. A man in business class scoffed. One even pulled out his phone. But Donovan ignored them. He didn't do it for show, didn't even realize he'd become a scene. The old woman looked up, her eyes cloudy but sharp. "You giving up this seat? For me?" Donovan nodded. "It's just a seat, ma'am." Her voice was thin, weathered like her hands. "You remind me of someone." He smiled awkwardly. "Good, I hope." She chuckled, and for a brief second she looked 30 years younger. The crew helped her into 1A, wrapping a blanket around her legs. She murmured a thank you, then went quiet. Donovan took the long walk back through economy. The plane vibrated differently back there. Claustrophobic, loud. His new seat was crammed between a crying toddler and a man chewing peanuts with his mouth open. Still, he didn't mind. Not yet. But this was just the beginning. The twist came later. Because that old woman, she wasn't just someone's grandma. She was the reason everything in Donovan's life would change. Everything. 8 hours earlier. Donovan stood alone in the Zurich Airport VIP lounge, sipping a double-shot espresso and reviewing a merger document on his tablet. He was wearing a charcoal Brioni suit, no tie, patent leather loafers, and the kind of watch that could buy a small house. At 39, he had already built and sold 3 startups. His latest venture, a clean tech platform valued at $2.4 billion, had just inked a deal with the UN. But right now he was just tired. Not from work, but from people. From meetings where smiles were fake and praise was just currency. So when a frazzled flight agent approached and whispered something about an elderly passenger who needed assistance, Donovan barely looked up until he saw her. Slender, tired, dark skin with silver hair wrapped in a cloth so white it almost glowed. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from effort. Pride clung to her posture even though her body sagged, and she was walking alone, dragging a walker with one busted wheel. No family, no aid, no dignity from the airline, clearly. She paused at the jet bridge, confused. An attendant pointed to the back. She blinked, lips moving slowly, trying to form a protest. Then Donovan made his decision. No, it wasn't a calculated gesture, not charity either. Something deeper, a whisper from his gut. Now, back in economy, he tried to close his eyes, but something itched at his mind. Who travels like that? An elderly woman, alone, on a 12-hour flight, with no support? Something didn't add up. Hours passed, the plane dimmed. Donovan skipped his meal. The man beside him passed out. The toddler kept kicking his shin. At one point he turned and glanced toward first class. The old woman was asleep, her head leaning gently against the window, her walker folded nearby, untouched. Peaceful, but something still tugged at him. He didn't recognize her face, but something in her voice had echoed. A tone, a weight. He tried to shake the thought, but couldn't. Not until they landed. As passengers stretched and yawned and scrambled for overhead bags, Donovan stayed seated. When the cabin lights flickered on, he stood slowly and walked forward. First class was mostly empty. She was still there, sipping warm water. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting him. "Come," she said, patting the seat beside her. Donovan hesitated, then sat. The silence between them was oddly comfortable. He smelled lavender on her sweater. She reached into a small canvas bag and pulled out a single folded page. "I want to show you something," she said. He took the paper, unfolded it, and froze. The name at the bottom hit him like thunder. Dr. Lucille Thorne, founder of the Global Equity Initiative, winner of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. A woman who had helped broker ceasefires in 4 nations, built more than 70 women's health centers in West Africa, and once stood face to face with warlords without flinching. He had seen a documentary about her. He remembered crying. You're Dr. Thorne?" She nodded slowly. "Was. Still am sometimes. Depends on the day." Donovan stared, dumbfounded. "Why were you flying in coach?" Her eyes gleamed with something sharp. "Because sometimes I like to disappear, not be stared at, not be praised, just be me." "But they put you in row 42. She sighed. "I didn't ask for favors. Sometimes people need to forget who you were to see who you are." Donovan didn't know what to say. She continued. "When I couldn't make it down that aisle, I thought maybe this was how my story would end. Quietly, invisibly. But then you gave up your seat. Not because you knew who I was, but because you saw me." She reached into her bag again. This time it wasn't paper. It was a black leather card, elegant, embossed with a golden seal. She pressed it into his palm. "This grants you access to my foundation. Full funding rights. No strings. No questions. Use it to change the world if you want, or don't. That's up to you." Donovan blinked. "Why me?" "Because you didn't wait to know who I was before acting like someone who matters." She stood then, slow but proud. And as she walked away, Donovan sat motionless, holding the card. He had boarded the flight thinking about stock splits. He stepped off thinking about purpose. And this was just the beginning. Donovan couldn't stop thinking about her. By the time his driver pulled up outside his brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, dawn had painted the sky in soft amber streaks. He sat in the back seat, still gripping the card Dr. Lucille Thorne had given him, like it might vanish if he let go. It wasn't just a gesture. It was an invitation, a challenge. But something didn't sit right. Why was a woman of her stature, one of the most powerful figures in global philanthropy, flying alone, economy class with no staff, no security, not even basic support? That wasn't humility. That was deliberate. Donovan entered his home, tossed his blazer on the armchair, and dropped into his leather couch, pulling out his phone. He typed, "Lucille Thorne whereabouts," and hit search. Nothing new. Last major public appearance, 3 years ago. Then she disappeared from public life after a heated fallout with the Global Equity Initiative Board over rumored corruption. Donovan remembered the headlines vaguely. Misallocated funds, resigned leadership. No charges filed. Then silence. He blinked. That wasn't retirement. That was exile. The next morning, still restless, Donovan walked into Coltech headquarters. His executive assistant, Priya, looked up from her desk. "You're early." "Didn't sleep." "That's rare." He nodded. "Cancel my lunch, and find out everything you can on the Global Equity Initiative, financials, leadership, any connections to Lucille Thorne." Priya raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. She'd learned by now not to. "Give me a few hours." Donovan turned toward his office but paused. "And Priya?" "Yeah?" "Be discreet, like ghost mode." She nodded. "Understood." Back in his office, Donovan pulled out the card again. It was heavier than it looked. On the back, handwritten in ink, was a single line. Don't trust the ones smiling the loudest. He frowned. That's when the call came. Unknown number. No caller ID. He let it ring twice, then answered. Donovan Cole. Mr. Cole, a woman's voice said, smooth, practiced. This is Alana Breyer. I'm an attorney representing the board of the Global Equity Initiative. All right. We understand you recently came into contact with Dr. Thorne. She's a vulnerable individual under psychological evaluation. We'd appreciate it if you returned any materials she may have given you. Donovan straightened in his seat. She seemed quite lucid to me. A pause. Mr. Cole, Dr. Thorne has a history of exaggeration. The document she gave you holds no legal weight. It was part of a revoked directive. Please disregard it. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. If it means nothing, why are you calling me at 6:45 a.m.? Another pause. Longer. She's not well. It's in everyone's best interest to let this go. Thanks for the advice, Donovan said, and hung up. The card suddenly felt radioactive in his pocket. That's when Priya messaged, Need to see this. Come to conference room C. Urgent. He walked fast. Inside, Priya had a laptop open, tabs spread across multiple screens. This goes deeper than it looks, she said. GEI's financials were pristine until about 4 years ago. Then weird donations started flowing in. Shell companies, anonymous foreign donors. She clicked. Here. This firm in Dubai donated $3 million. Next quarter, that same amount disappeared through a consulting fee. The consultant? Non-existent. Donovan's mind raced. Embezzlement? Looks like it. And guess what? Right around the time Lucille stepped down, all her top allies were removed. New board, new lawyers. The whole structure flipped. He exhaled. She wasn't ousted for incompetence. She was forced out. Priya nodded. And whoever's running the show now, they're laundering money through a humanitarian brand. Donovan rubbed his jaw. I'm going to see her. Do you even know where she is? He pulled out the card. Now I do. The taxi dropped him outside a small, ivy-covered townhouse in Harlem. Modest, quiet, definitely not the kind of place you'd expect a global icon to live. Donovan knocked. Silence. Then the door opened. Lucille stood in a navy cardigan and soft gray slacks, leaning slightly on her cane. Her eyes were sharp, like she'd been expecting him. You came. You knew I would. She stepped aside. Inside, the home was simple. Books everywhere, classical records, photographs of places Donovan only recognized from National Geographic, Sudan, Nepal, Colombia. He sat at her kitchen table. She poured him tea. I assume they've already called you, she said. Yeah. They said you're unstable. She snorted. I was unstable enough to threaten their profit margin. Donovan leaned in. Why me? Lucille met his gaze. Because you're young enough to still be angry, but powerful enough to do something about it. And more importantly, you didn't ask who I was before helping. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of bank records, emails, photos of board members meeting in private villas, wearing smiles too wide to be real. They used my legacy to build a facade, a machine. They clean their hands with the suffering of others. She paused. I need someone they won't see coming. Donovan's pulse quickened. You want to go after them? Lucille's voice dropped. No, son. I want to burn them down. The room went quiet. That moment, Donovan made his choice. The next chapter of his life wouldn't be about building tech or accumulating wealth. It would be about justice. And it would start now. It didn't take long for the fire to start. Within 48 hours of meeting Lucille, Donovan Cole had his entire schedule cleared, his private security increased, and his legal team on silent alert. But he kept everything quiet. He couldn't afford a leak. Not now. Not while they were still ahead. Priya, ever the ghost in the machine, had managed to pull archived GEI internal memos that were never meant to be public. Hidden among bureaucratic reports was a trail of forced resignations, gag orders, and one memo marked confidential with Lucille's name, crossed out in red ink and replaced by unsuitable for board communication. They had scrubbed her out like a mistake. Now Donovan planned to put her right back at the center of their world, but not alone. At 9 a.m. sharp, he walked into the Midtown Manhattan offices of Monroe, Devlin, and Chase, a law firm known for defending class action suits against some of the biggest corporations in the country, and occasionally winning. He was met by Ellen Devlin herself, a tall woman with a sharp bob and sharper eyes. She didn't offer coffee. "You want to take on the Global Equity Initiative?" she asked, arms folded. "That's practically inviting every shadow syndicate in philanthropy to gut you." "I want to burn down a lie built on the backs of the poor," Donovan said simply. "Are you in or out?" Ellen didn't blink. "I'm in, but I don't play nice." "Neither do they." She leaned back, studying him. "Then let's hit them where it hurts." By week's end, the investigation was fully underway. They started small. Whistleblower forums, former employees, travel records. Priya discovered a coded pattern hidden in the quarterly expense logs, each suspicious transaction aligned with key GEI board trips to exotic locales. Fake conferences, real bribes. But then came the twist. Lucille's name wasn't just absent from the new documents. It had been replaced. Someone had falsified new reports, making it appear as though she had signed off on those shady transactions after her resignation. Forged emails, backdated approvals. "They're setting her up," Donovan growled, slamming a file shut. Priya looked pale. "If this leaks to the media now, she'll go down as the face of the corruption. They're painting her as the mastermind." "She'll be destroyed," Ellen added. "And you along with her." Donovan stood silent for a long moment. Then his voice dropped. "Not if we flip the script." "How?" He turned to the board member names Priya had pulled, several now in government posts, one with a recent nomination for UN ambassador, another heading a tech charity under federal contract. "If they think we're playing defense, they'll stay smug. We go on offense. We expose one of their golden boys." "Who?" Ellen asked. "Stephen Rivington." Priya's eyes widened. "The UN nominee? That'll be nuclear." "Exactly." Rivington had always styled himself as the clean-cut philanthropist, the face of every press junket, the mouthpiece for every new initiative GEI announced. The media adored him. But Donovan's team had something the public didn't: a recorded call between Rivington and an anonymous consultant arranging a kickback from an education fund meant for war-torn regions in the Congo. The voice print matched. And worse, the call had been traced to a secure government building. The scandal wouldn't just expose financial fraud, it would raise questions about U.S. government complicity. Now the stakes weren't just personal, they were national. That night, Donovan returned to Harlem. Lucille greeted him with an unreadable expression. "You're shaking the ground," she said as he stepped inside. "I plan to crack it wide open." She motioned for him to sit. "The GEI board has been insulated for years. You're not just tugging at a thread. You're yanking at a tapestry sewn together by powerful men and women who know how to disappear their enemies." Donovan met her gaze. "They tried to disappear you." Lucille paused. Her voice was soft, almost distant. "I let them. For a while, I let them convince me I was the problem, that I'd pushed too hard, too fast, that my outrage made me unstable." She looked away, jaw clenched. "But then I saw my name on those doctored reports, and I knew." "They never wanted you gone," Donovan said quietly. "They wanted you blamed." Lucille looked up. So now what? Donovan's voice was steady. We take back the narrative. He opened his briefcase and laid out a press strategy. Timed leaks, whistleblower interviews, a confidential source in the Atlantic, ready to go live with a deep dive expose. Lucille stared at it all, hands trembling slightly. You're not just helping me, she whispered. You're giving me back my voice. Donovan reached across the table. You never lost it. They just drowned it out. For the first time, she smiled. Not a soft smile, a dangerous one. Then let them hear me scream. Lucille had been through storms, but this one felt like a hurricane aimed straight at her soul. As soon as the first article broke, a scathing expose in the Atlantic titled "The Billion-Dollar Betrayal: How Global Equity Initiatives Sold Out the Poor." Everything changed. Her phone didn't stop ringing. At first, the calls were from old allies, stunned and furious. Then came the media outlets, hungry for interviews. And then, chillingly, the threats started rolling in. Blocked numbers, menacing silence, the occasional whispered voice. Stop now, Lucille. But she didn't flinch. Not anymore. The world had finally started listening, and she wasn't about to let fear drown her out again. Meanwhile, Donovan was playing a dangerous game of chess. At his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, he paced like a general at war. Across from him sat Priya, her laptop open, eyes darting between live feeds and encrypted messages. We've got movement on Rivington, she said. He canceled his speech at the UN summit. His team says it's the flu, but we traced a private flight to Geneva. He's running. Donovan stopped pacing. Good. Let him feel the walls closing in. Just then, Ellen Devlin burst through the door. You've got a leak, she said flatly. Donovan's jaw tightened. From our side? Number from Lucille's past. She dropped a folder onto his desk. 20 years ago, she was arrested for trespassing on federal property. She led a student protest. She never mentioned it. Donovan flipped through the record. He exhaled. That's nothing. It won't matter. GEI is already spinning it, claiming she has a history of radical behavior. They're painting her as unstable again. Priya chimed in. We have to get ahead of this. Donovan nodded. Call her, now. Lucille sat alone in her modest apartment in Harlem, staring at a photo of her younger self. Braids, torn jeans, eyes full of fire. The protest had been small, just 10 college students chaining themselves to the gates outside a military-funded biotech lab that had ties to unethical trials in West Africa. It was the first time she had been arrested. It was also the first time she felt truly alive. When Donovan's call came, she answered before the second ring. They're digging, he said. I know, she replied calmly. I can shut this down. Bury the record. Lucille laughed softly. Why? I'm not ashamed of who I was. That girl built the woman I am now. There was silence on the other end. Then Donovan's voice, softer this time. Then we go public. But we do it on our terms. The next morning, Lucille appeared on CBS Mornings. She wore a deep green dress and no jewelry, her hair pulled back, her voice calm, controlled. When I was 22, she told the host, I was arrested for standing in front of a gate. Not to keep anyone out, but to keep truth in. She looked directly into the camera. They said I was radical. I say I was right. The clip went viral. Across social media, thousands rallied behind her. Hashtags exploded. Number signs stand with Lucille. Old students shared stories. Former employees of GEI began reaching out with stories of silencing, of ethical breaches. The floodgates opened, but it also made her a bigger target. That night, someone slashed the tires on her car. The next day, someone threw a brick through her kitchen window. Donovan sent security immediately. Lucille refused it at first, but relented after Priya showed her a hacked internal message from a GEI executive. She goes down, or we all do. Lucille stood at her kitchen window, shards of glass on the floor, sirens echoing somewhere in the distance. They're scared, she whispered. Yes, Priya said, they should be. At GEI's New York headquarters, Stephen Rivington stood in the boardroom, face pale. The board was unraveling. Donors were pulling out. An independent investigation had just been launched, and worst of all, one of the vice presidents, Andrea Hall, a long-time silent witness, had agreed to testify. They're going to drag us through the mud, he said. You dragged yourself, Andrea snapped. We all did. But Lucille, she just refused to stay dirty. In a panic, Rivington called a closed-door meeting with Crisis PR. They needed a new scapegoat. They picked Donovan. That night, headlines hit the web. Donovan Cole's dirty dealings. Is the billionaire buying justice? They posted screenshots of manipulated documents showing Donovan profiting off insider donations to Lucille's community work. The internet erupted. Lucille called him immediately. They're coming for you now. I expected it, he said, but this time I fight back. He paused. And I fight with you. Lucille swallowed hard. Then let's burn their house down. And this time she meant it. Every word. The headlines were merciless. Donovan Cole, billionaire philanthropist or puppet master. Shocking documents linked Donovan Cole to illegal donations. It didn't matter that the evidence was flimsy, even doctored. The court of public opinion didn't wait for facts. For the first time in decades, Donovan wasn't in control. At his downtown penthouse, he stared blankly at the television. His hands clenched the edges of the kitchen counter until his knuckles turned white. Priya, calm but tight-lipped, paced behind him. This isn't just a smear campaign. They've activated every connection they have. This is coordinated. Donovan turned, his voice low and tight. They want to isolate me, make me toxic, and when I fall, Lucille goes down with me. Priya hesitated. We might need to pull her out, at least for a while. Take the heat off. She won't run, Donovan said flatly. Not again. Across town, Lucille sat in the quiet of a borrowed hotel suite. The slashed tires, the broken window, the endless threats. Donovan insisted she take shelter while his team tried to contain the chaos. But Lucille wasn't at peace. She'd spent her entire life speaking truth, believing it would be enough. Now, with the truth finally catching fire, they were rewriting the rules, twisting it, weaponizing it. Her phone buzzed, a text from Donovan. Need you to see something. I'm coming. 15 minutes later, he was standing in front of her, a storm behind his eyes. He handed her a tablet. On it, an internal memo, leaked anonymously, dated 2 years ago, stamped with Stephen Rivington's name. Lucille scrolled through. Her breath caught. The memo outlined a campaign to redirect billions in earmarked funds meant for underprivileged schools into private education programs owned by GEI's subsidiaries. Lucille's name was on a list of high-risk disruptors. They were planning to discredit you before you ever stepped foot on that plane, Donovan said. Lucille's jaw tightened. So this seat switch, it wasn't chance. They knew who you were, what you stood for. They were scared even then. A silence fell between them. They tried to erase me, Lucille finally said. But I'm still here. Donovan's voice dropped. Then we don't just fight. We expose every last piece of this. Meanwhile, in a glass tower overlooking Wall Street, Stephen Rivington met with his attorneys. He was unraveling. Why is Andrea Hall still breathing? He barked. She had an NDA. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. It's not holding. The court is prioritizing whistleblower protection. And the press loves her. Then discredit her, Rivington snapped. Now. As his team scrambled, another blow landed, this time from someone unexpected. Cassandra Miles, the head of a rival foundation. She held a press conference condemning GEI's actions, then dropped a bombshell. She'd received a confidential report detailing years of GEI's fraudulent practices, and she was turning it over to federal investigators. Rivington's face turned ash white, and then the worst twist of all. He received a call from a private line. "Stephen," said the voice on the other end, low and unmistakable. "We know what you did." "Who is this?" he snapped. "You took from our communities, from our children, and now you'll face us." The line went dead. That night, Lucille went live on a national special, sitting across from Anderson West on his primetime program. "You were almost erased," he said. "What stopped you from walking away?" Lucille looked into the camera. "I've been silenced, arrested, mocked, but I've never been invisible. Not to the children who go to sleep hungry, not to the mothers juggling 2 jobs and still falling short. I owe them my voice. I owe them the fight." The studio fell silent. Not even a whisper. Then Anderson asked, "Do you still believe in justice?" Lucille's answer was clear. "No," she said. "I believe in action. Justice is what we build after the fight." Across the country, homes erupted in applause. Messages flooded in. Politicians took sides. Celebrities voiced support. Communities marched. Donovan's legal team launched a countersuit against GEI, filing for defamation and corporate sabotage. Rivington's team? They were falling apart. The final blow came from a former intern who released audio recordings. Hours of boardroom discussions revealing how GEI executives had buried research, suppressed whistleblowers, and redirected humanitarian aid for profit. Lucille listened to one clip in stunned silence. It ended with Rivington laughing. "She's just an old woman in a fancy seat. What can she really do?" Lucille closed her eyes. She wasn't just a woman in a seat anymore. She was the storm coming for them. The courtroom was standing room only. Every major network had a camera outside. Protesters chanted on the courthouse steps. And inside, every seat was taken, except for the one reserved for Lucille on the front row. She stepped into the courtroom, tall and composed, wearing a deep navy suit that mirrored the skies outside, dark with the promise of a storm. She nodded at Donovan, who sat beside his legal team, jaw clenched, eyes unreadable. As the judge entered, silence dropped like a curtain. Today's proceedings concern the case of Cole versus GEI Corporation and the accompanying motion to subpoena internal financial records from the defendant. Stephen Rivington sat across the room, smug behind his lawyers, flanked by executives who once walked red carpets and rang stock market bells. Lucille couldn't look away. He was the man who had dismissed her, twice now, as a nobody. First on that plane, then in boardrooms across America. But today she wasn't here to prove her worth. She was here to prove the truth. Donovan's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we submit audio evidence and a sworn deposition from a former GEI financial analyst demonstrating systematic fraud spanning over 8 years. We request that the court compel GEI to release their internal records." Rivington's attorney rose in protest. "This is a media stunt. These so-called revelations are unsubstantiated and politically motivated. We object to this witch hunt." Before the judge could respond, Lucille stood. "Your Honor, may I speak?" A hush fell. The judge glanced at the attorneys, then nodded. "Proceed." Lucille walked to the center of the courtroom, not as a witness or a plaintiff, but as a citizen who'd had enough. 8 months ago, I was told my presence in a seat I'd paid for was threatening. I was forced to stand not because of what I'd done, but because of who I am. Since then, I've seen how deep that rot goes, how men like Mr. Rivington use power not just to grow richer, but to erase people who threaten their comfort. She turned to the jury. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for accountability. And I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for every working mother, every overlooked teacher, every kid told their life doesn't matter because someone else holds the checkbook. There was no applause, just the thick, tight silence of people realizing they were witnessing something they'd tell their grandkids about. Then a woman stood in the gallery. She looked to be in her 70s, thin-framed glasses, trembling hands clutching a cane. She raised her voice. She gave up her seat for me. All heads turned. Lucille turned, stunned. It was the old woman from the flight, the one she'd helped, the one who disappeared in the chaos. I didn't know who she was, the woman continued, but I'll never forget how she looked at me. Like I mattered, like I wasn't invisible. And now I see that's who she's always been. The judge's gavel struck, but the moment had already ignited. One by one, others stood, people from communities Lucille had worked in for decades. A young man from Baltimore, a mother from Oakland, a school principal from Detroit. Each with a story, each with her name in it. It wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a reckoning. Outside, the protest lines had grown. Chants changed from justice for Lucille to open the books and hold GEI accountable. And inside, the judge finally spoke. This court will grant the subpoena. GEI is ordered to release all requested records within 72 hours. Motion carried. Rivington's composure cracked. His hand twitched. His lawyers whispered furiously. Lucille walked back to her seat, but this time she didn't feel small. She felt like a flame catching wind. That evening, Donovan watched as the news broke nationwide. The subpoena, the testimonies, the woman from the plane, and Lucille, every word she'd said, played on loop. He leaned back in his chair, smiling for the first time in weeks. But before the segment ended, a new development dropped. The DOJ had opened a formal investigation into GEI's business practices, and the SEC had frozen their accounts, pending audit. Donovan's phone lit up with messages. Then one call came in that made him pause. Lucille. He picked up. They're not just scared, she said. They're running. He smiled. So what's next? Lucille's voice was calm, unwavering. Now? We build something better. The storm had finally broken. Rain lashed the windows of GEI's New York headquarters, and inside chaos reigned. Conference rooms filled with frantic voices. Phones buzzed nonstop. Executives who once sipped champagne now whispered with trembling hands. And in the eye of it all stood Stephen Rivington, pale, red-eyed, cornered. The Department of Justice had issued formal subpoenas. The SEC had begun freezing key accounts. Investors were pulling out in droves. And worst of all, internal emails leaked, proving that GEI had actively conspired to falsify numbers and silence whistleblowers. But this wasn't just a financial collapse. It was personal. At that moment, Lucille stood in front of a packed auditorium in Atlanta, where the National Equity Summit was being held. She hadn't planned to speak, but the crowd had been chanting her name since she arrived. She stepped up to the podium, took a breath, and looked out at the sea of faces. Young professionals, students, leaders, mothers, people who had seen themselves in her story. I didn't ask for this spotlight, she began, but sometimes life doesn't ask. It throws you into the fire and dares you to rise. The applause started slow, then surged. Across the country, her speech was broadcast live. News anchors stopped mid-segment to air it. Social media lit up with clips, quotes, hashtags, and in the middle of that frenzy, a bombshell dropped. A former GEI board member, Elise Caldwell, came forward. In a live interview, she revealed everything: how Stephen had doctored the quarterly reports, how internal teams raised red flags and were fired, how Lucille's name had been intentionally blacklisted after her confrontation on the plane. They called her the Disruption, Elise said, her voice trembling. But the truth is, she saw what none of us wanted to face, and now we all have to. The clip went viral within minutes. By nightfall, GEI's stock had dropped 47%. The board announced Stephen Rivington's immediate suspension. Investigators raided company offices, and the FAA announced it would re-examine airline discrimination policies, starting with the incident that had kicked it all off. Back in Atlanta, Lucille was quietly slipping out of the auditorium when Donovan caught up to her. "You saw it?" he asked, holding up his phone, the Elise Caldwell interview still playing. Lucille nodded. "I saw it." "And?" he pressed. "You won." She gave a soft, tired smile. "I didn't win. The truth did, and it took a whole lot of people to carry it here." As they walked toward the exit, a young girl, maybe 10, tugged at Lucille's sleeve. "Are you the lady who gave up her seat on the plane?" Lucille knelt down, eye level with her. "I am." The girl's eyes widened. "My mama said you showed the world what courage looks like." Lucille reached out and touched her hand. "Then your mama is raising a lion." The girl beamed, then ran back to her mother, who mouthed thank you with tears in her eyes. Lucille turned to Donovan. "This isn't the end." He raised a brow. "You planning something?" She looked out into the storm-lit night. Not planning. Building that evening, she met with a group of leaders, including small business owners, civil rights attorneys, and tech entrepreneurs. They gathered not in a boardroom, but in a community center gym in southwest Atlanta. Folding chairs, cold coffee, warm hearts. Lucille stood at the front with a whiteboard and a dream. "We've seen what happens when power is hoarded, when truth is twisted, when access is denied. So let's flip the model. Let's build something that puts people first, not just words, action, education, investment, ownership." The room fell into a hush. Then one by one people nodded. A man stood. "I can bring funding." A woman beside him added, "I'll offer legal infrastructure." Another voice, "My company can provide the tech." Donovan leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching the movement take root. Not a press stunt, not a revenge play, a revolution. That night, while GEI's empire began to crumble, Lucille's movement began to rise. She posted a video. Not flashy, no music, just her speaking straight into the camera. "I never imagined that giving up my seat would lead to this. But maybe it was never about the seat. Maybe it was about who gets to sit at the table. And I'm here to say, we're building a bigger table, and you're invited." It was shared over 5 million times in 24 hours, and by morning, it wasn't just a movement. It was a force. A year later, the skies were clear, but the world beneath them had changed. Lucille stepped off the small private jet onto the tarmac of LAX, dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit that moved with her like armor. Behind her, the plane bore a fresh insignia. The Gold Phoenix of Elira Aviation, the first minority and women-owned airline cooperative in the U.S., born from the ashes of scandal and built with community capital. The press was already waiting. A dozen microphones pointed in her direction, camera shutters clicking like applause. She hadn't come for attention. She'd come for the final hearing, Congress's formal unveiling of the Air Equity Act, legislation sparked by the events of that fateful flight, aiming to eradicate discrimination in commercial aviation. Inside the grand chamber, rows of senators, CEOs, and citizens filled the benches. On one end sat Stephen Rivington, flanked by his attorneys, face hollow, now stripped of wealth and title. On the other sat a quiet row of flight attendants who had once feared speaking up, and in the center, walking forward to the microphone, stood Lucille. She began, calm and certain. What happened to me on that plane wasn't just about bias or inconvenience. It was about the systemic belief that money, gender, and color determine worth. I gave up my seat because I believed an elder deserved dignity. What followed showed how fragile dignity is when power forgets its humanity. Silence. Then a standing ovation, first the public, then the panel. Even one of the more conservative senators clapped reluctantly, nodding. As Lucille returned to her seat, Donovan whispered, "I swear you could run for Senate and win with that speech alone." She chuckled. "Let's start with changing skies before we try the whole country." But the biggest moment came later that evening. At the black tie gala celebrating the passage of the Air Equity Act, the same elderly woman Lucille had given her seat to, Ruth Whitman, stood on stage, voice trembling but strong. She didn't just give up her seat. She gave me hope that this country could still surprise me. Ruth wiped a tear and looked down at Lucille. "I never told you this, but the day I boarded that plane, I was flying to say goodbye to my sister, who was in hospice. I didn't think anyone cared anymore. You did. And because of you, I got to hold her hand before she passed." Gasps swept the room. Lucille's hand instinctively went to her chest. "But that's not all," Ruth continued. "With the settlement GEI was forced to pay, I was able to start a foundation in my sister's name to support elderly women traveling for medical care. And today I'm proud to name our very first award after the woman who reminded me what humanity looks like." She lifted a golden plaque. "The Lucille Carter Courage Award." Lucille stood slowly, caught off guard, genuinely stunned for the first time in a long while. Reporters caught her mouthing, "This wasn't supposed to be about me." But the truth was, it had always been more than her. It was about what she represented. Kindness in a cutthroat world, humility in wealth, grace under fire. Later that night, alone on a rooftop balcony, Lucille looked out over Los Angeles. Donovan joined her quietly, handing her a glass of champagne. "Feels like a movie, doesn't it?" he said. She smirked. "Yeah, but in this one, the underdog doesn't just win. She changes the rules." He nodded. "What's next?" She took a slow sip, eyes scanning the skyline. "More stories. More people who've been silenced too long. We've lit a fuse. Now let's make sure it burns." Back downstairs, a young boy ran up to Lucille with his parents, holding a model airplane. "Miss Carter, when I grow up, I want to fly your airline." She crouched to meet his eyes. "And when you do, promise me you'll make room for someone else who needs it, too." He nodded with a big grin. Lucille stood tall, her legacy no longer written in press releases or headlines, but in the quiet ways people remembered her. In a saved goodbye, a protected dream, a little boy's model plane. The truth was, she gave up her seat, but what she got in return was far greater. A movement, a voice, and the proof that one selfless act can rewrite an entire system. And maybe, just maybe, restore a bit of faith in humanity. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about how we treat others, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Because here we believe every story, especially the ones that go unheard, deserves to be told loud and clear.